girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I like the girls with their nails done.
Hello everyone, welcome to the series of Today we have with us Tim. He has around 320,000 subscribers on YouTube. He has been teaching Python since long to everyone, and also he is a software development engineer in Microsoft. So, hello, yeah, Tim, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Yeah, sure. So can you please introduce yourself? Like, obviously everyone knows people have been watching your Python videos since so long.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Tim. I'm 19. I'm about to turn 20 in, I think, about 12 days now. And I work as a software engineer intern at Microsoft. I run a YouTube channel called Tech with Tim. I also have a website called techwithtim.net. And my online presence is really dedicated just to teaching people programming and giving tips and advice, just like the talk we're about to have here.
Hi Tim, it's great to have you here. And like I have personally been following you like from a very long time. I started with your Python videos, and you're a great teacher there. So I wanted to ask, like, what's your personal journey been like in programming and how you got into it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I started programming when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I started quite young. And really, it kind of stemmed from the fact that I'd always just been really interested in how things worked and why things worked. And that kind of is every aspect of my life, not just computers and tech. So as soon as I started kind of getting on computers and using computers at a young age, my first thought was, how do these things work? Like, what is under the hood? What's going on? And that eventually led me to looking into things like at computer hardware, processors, graphics cards, all of that kind of stuff. And then eventually led me down the path of coding. So I started coding. It's probably about 11 years old. It's really hard to remember all the way back then. And that was just because I was looking online one day. I found some coding tutorial. I was like, oh, this looks kind of cool. Let's follow along with that. So I was learning basic HTML and then eventually moved to JavaScript, PHP, kind of that full web stack language back in like 2012, which is a lot different than now. And the more I learned coding, the more I was just kind of obsessed with it. It was really the first thing that I had ever found that really challenged me, that was really difficult, and was something that I was working towards. Because for me personally, as a high school student and in elementary school, I never really felt challenged, at least by the school system where I was. Everything was pretty easy. There was nothing that I really had to think super hard about. But programming was difficult, and it was the first thing that I struggled with, and that's why I enjoyed doing it. So I learned at that age. Then getting into high school, I had some experience with it because I've been learning these different languages. I knew, the basic syntax, basic programming. And then I learned Python because that was what we were going to learn in our introduction to programming class. So I learned that language, immediately fell in love with Python just because before that I had actually been working in C#. This is when I was probably 14 that I was working in C#. And Python was just so much easier. The syntax was just so much cleaner. And programs that I were writing in C# I could mimic in Python in half the amount of lines just because it's a lot easier to express what I wanted to in code. So then from there, I went into computer science at university and got the job at Microsoft. And that's kind of my personal journey, learning to code and getting into it. So.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So like I had one question. Like I've seen a lot of your content in Python, and like that's even my proficient language at the moment. I wanted to know what can you give for the beginners out there who are getting into programming right now? I think Python is a great language, like to get started with programming. What are some general tips for them, like which you would want to give?
So just generally to anyone learning to program?
Yes. For the absolute beginners who are just getting there.
Sure. So I think when you're a beginner, this is what I always say. It's really important to make sure that rather than just memorizing things, you're actually focusing on understanding. Programming is a much different field than many of the other things you'll traditionally learn, especially in some kind of school system. In most school systems, you can kind of get away with just memorizing either how to do something or like just memorizing content, right? Think of biology, for example, in high school, at least where I go. Most of that class is just straight memorizing facts. And most people learn at a very young age just through the school system that, oh, they can just memorize everything and get away with it. Programming is something that really just depends on thinking. So I always encourage people that are learning to really focus on why and how the things that you're writing are working rather than trying to memorize each specific line of code. That memory will come. You'll learn the syntax as you do more, but focus on solving problems, but actually thinking about why things are happening, and sometimes even taking a few minutes and not writing any code and just reading your code and figuring out what the heck is actually going on. Other than that, learning coding, I mean, you can go down kind of any path you want. And what I usually encourage people to do is once they've got the basics down of some language, which is pretty easy to do, you can go watch a YouTube video for a few hours or go through some little course and kind of get an idea of what programming is about, to start doing a little bit of research and figuring out what area in programming interests you. Do you want to make apps? Do you want to make websites? Do you want to be kind of a backend engineer? Do you want to work on servers? What do you want to do? Because from there, then you can kind of pick what field you want to start looking at, or at least start kind of tasting some different areas of programming. From personal experience, I know when I started programming, I didn't even really know there was all these different languages. I had no idea what you could even do with all these different things. And I kind of was just trapped in the idea of that, oh, I had to make websites. That's what programming was, because that's where I had started. Meanwhile, I actually enjoy working on backend systems a lot more, where I'm just solving problems. But I didn't know that until I started doing that. And I wasted a lot of time learning web development, which is something that personally I don't think I'm going to use very much, right? So that's kind of my tips, would be to explore different areas, figure out what it is you actually really want to do, and just kind of taste a few different things as a beginner, because this is a great time to just figure out what it is you like, and then you can focus a lot of your effort into that thing and get better in that specific area.
Yes, that like sums it up perfectly. Yep. So like one aspect, like as a programmer, like I have also struggled with personally, is that sometimes we when you're programming, you don't get the ideas for next projects or which project to work on. So like my question to you would be like, what could be some good project ideas or projects you could work on for get land like showing good at your resume, and like it should make a mark on that. So that's why.
Yes, this is a really common question. Pretty much everyone I've ever known, asks me, "Oh, what's a good programming project?" Or they're looking for good projects. The answer to this is really subjective, right? I mean, it could be anything. I usually like to recommend people do something that aligns with some kind of hobby or something else that they enjoy doing. Most programmers, I assume, do something else on the side. For example, like I'm really into fishing. That's what I like doing. So maybe building an app around one of your hobbies, something that you know really well, is something that I like to recommend. And I don't like to give any super specific examples, because I think what shows the best on a resume is something that not only shows your programming ability, but shows that you did it not just to put on your resume, right? If you can pick a project that is something that you would make regardless of if you were going to show it on your resume or not, I think you already right there have a great project idea, because that's going to be something that probably not a lot of other people have made before. And that if you actually get an interview, you can talk to a ton. I think people forget that the whole point of the project is to demonstrate your knowledge. And if you know the project really well, it's something you're passionate about, when you're speaking about it, people can just tell immediately that, hey, like this person was really into this project. They really enjoyed doing it. So I usually recommend, pick some kind of hobby you have. Think about something that you enjoy. Maybe you like cars, whatever it may be, right? And then make some kind of app around that, because that's something you already know really well. And you'll already have a bunch of ideas for how you could do something. Another thing I like to say is just clone popular apps already. Like, for example, I cloned, what is it? And I go, okay, I'm going to make my own version of this. And then that way you already have all the features laid out. You can see kind of how they've done things over there, and then just copy it on your own end. And I think you learn a lot doing that. Other than that, something visual is usually pretty important. I like to make something that has some kind of graphical user interface. So to someone who's not a programmer, or someone who just wants to look at the project quickly can really easily get an idea of what it's about, rather than something that's a little more cryptic and just maybe like a command line interface. Even if it is super impressive, it's only going to be as impressive as the person understands what it does, right? So that's kind of my general tips. Again, hard to really give a specific example of a good programming project. And I would hope that you probably wouldn't even want me to give that, because that would mean everyone's just going to be making the same thing. So
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and yep. Moving on, like I wanted to ask, like, is like what is your first internship experience like? Is the Microsoft one your first one, or can you elaborate on that a bit? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So the Microsoft internship is my first internship. As I've said, I just finished second year. So I didn't really have any other opportunities to do a proper internship. I suppose I could have done one in the summer between first and second year. But yeah, this is my first software engineering internship. It's been a really cool experience, especially working for such a large organization. Like Microsoft has over 150,000 employees, right? So to understand how they kind of communicate and work and as such a large organization is really cool. And it's really nice to learn some of the processes and things that you might not learn in school about software engineering. Personally, I can't say I've learned any crazy coding skills at Microsoft. I know a lot of the programming I do now, I already understand, that infrastructure stuff, the design, I understand. But what I've learned a lot of is kind of the process of software development and software engineering. So figuring out, okay, how does a code review work? How do I actually submit code? What is a release schedule? How do we plan out how much work we're going to be doing? Oh, who gets to do what? What happens when something breaks? So how do we have a testing pipeline so we don't have to manually test anything? Things like that they can't really show you in school because it is so new and it's just hard to demonstrate something that's so large. That's just been really valuable to me personally because I've kind of understood how mass software development actually works. And it's cool to see that. So yeah, my first experience has been great though. It's been a really good time. I am on a small team, about 8 or 9 people. So I know pretty much everyone on my team. We have some kind of a close relationship, and it's been neat to work almost as a full-time software engineer, because that's kind of the way that I'm treated at Microsoft. They give me, they trust me to do pretty much anything, and any code they would give a full-time engineer to write, they're, more than happy to give me to do. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. You start learning about like the complete software development cycle, like rather than just making your own program. And yeah, so that's nice. You learn a lot of things other than just documentation testing. So yeah, one more question I had. Like I had seen your video on like your interview experience on YouTube. I mean on your internship experience, you were telling it's somewhere along the lines of working with TypeScript and that ecosystem with Node. So yeah, one question I had was like you'd have heard that now Dino has come up, and like, what's your take on that? And like, is it gonna replace Node.js anytime soon?
Sorry, could you just what was the framework or technology you named?
Dino, Deno.
Oh yeah. So to be honest, I don't really know much about that at all. I've seen like a few kind of crazy headlines about it, just reading through whatever LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter, whatever it may be. But I have no idea. I'm not a JavaScript developer. The reason I'm using TypeScript is just because that's what we use in the extension that I work on. I am still very much a Python developer. That's still more my wheelhouse. I know TypeScript. I'm comfortable writing in it, which also means I kind of know JavaScript at the same time because they are very similar languages. But that whole Node.js ecosystem and environment and everything going on there, I don't know much about. So unfortunately, I can't really give you a good answer to that question.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. So yeah, like even I'm majorly a Python developer. So like I wanted to know like how we can, like as a Python developer in general, how can we like move forward from being just a Python developer? What like career paths we can take? Like we can go along the ML trajectory, or like what's your take on that?
Sure. So I think Python is a great multi-purpose language, but as you've probably seen and a lot of people see, there's actually not a ton of things that are just written entirely in Python, right? Like Python is usually just used as kind of a back-end language or a scripting language, or in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I think the main career path for a Python developer is something along the lines of data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence. But I think if you have a complementary language, then you can actually move into kind of back-end development and server and web development using Python, which is something that I like to do. So what I usually recommend for people that just know Python if they want to move into kind of a full stack position, then I would recommend you learn something like JavaScript, right? Because now you kind of have a back end, you have a front end, you understand those two different kind of paradigms or differences between those languages. But if you're someone who's more into just back end development, and you don't want to just do machine learning and AI stuff, I'd recommend you learn something like Golang, or you learn kind of a more back end heavy language, because then you have not only a scripting language, but you also have a really good and performance heavy language that you could use on some kind of server and some kind of back end system. I know Golang's really big right now among a lot of the top tech companies. I know it was developed at Google. I know Google uses it for most of their backend stuff. I know a lot of large websites, people I know that have founded companies that use Golang. So that's kind of my recommendation for that. I mean, I think you can kind of go wherever you want. Python is such a multi-purpose language. It's probably used in a ton of different things, but depends what path you want to go down, right? I personally am not a huge fan. I don't really want to be a data scientist or machine learning engineer or anything like that. So I'm kind of trying to learn some new languages so that I can work on different teams doing different things, not just some kind of data science job.
Yes, correct. Yeah, you're right. Like Python, like it's so multi-purpose right now. There are like, micro Python, like, those ecosystems also evolving in the Python like ecosystem. So yeah, I would like moving on. Like I wanted to ask like I'm a backend, like I'm more of a backend guy. So like right now I don't have a clear path. Like I'm comfortable Python. Like I have like advanced, you can say like kind of advanced knowledge in Python. I wanted to know, like, I want to be in the backend space. What's the next, like, what are the next topics I could learn on, like, in the backend space, so I can expand as a backend developer? Like you
Sure.
mentioned Golang, but like how more in that? Yep. Thanks.
Sure. So I think backend engineering or backend software development, or whatever you want to call it, is really a lot more about design and architecture than it is just about programming, right? I mean, when you get to the point where you're working as a software engineer, everyone you're working with knows how to program, right? Everyone knows Python. If they don't know it, they'll just look it up and they can figure it out quite quickly. What I've really noticed separates kind of the good from the great is the ability to design programs and the ability to kind of look at code critically and say, hey, is this the best way to write this code? It's not just about writing code, it's about writing the best code, right? So what I would recommend if you want to go into kind of the back-end space is start learning about system design and software design. Start learning about, okay, different design patterns, something like inversion of control. That's something that I use a ton right now in the extension that I'm working on, like injecting dependencies, stuff like that. There's a whole whack ton of stuff in that space. And it's hard to give any specifics, but even just something you would learn in like a basic software engineering class, right? Okay, how do I collect requirements? How fast does the system need to be? What is the specifications for what I'm creating? Okay, is this class structure going to be maintainable? Can I add something to this in the future? Just really thinking about kind of the software design principles and applying that to all of the code that you write. I know personally, like I look back at some code I wrote 2 or 3 years ago and I'm like, oh, that was, horrid. Like, why would I have ever done that? But that's just because I didn't have those principles. I didn't understand enough about software development and software design. And right now working at Microsoft, I'm in an extension that has like 700,000 lines of code, right? It needs to be designed well because any code I write is going to have to be maintained by someone else. And it's going to be maintained for 10, maybe 20 years, right? I have no idea how long that's going to live for. So that really is probably the most important thing in backend. In front end, obviously that's important as well, but I think it's less important because it's not as performance heavy and driven, right? If I write some really bad code, I could actually reduce the performance of my extension and make it so that users are, waiting an extremely long time for a specific task to finish or for something to happen. So.
Yep. So, we have some questions like from the stream right now. I'll just take some of them. So we have the first one, like the question is, do people who use Python over Java/C++ are looked down in internship / job interviews?
Sorry, what's the question?
Oh yeah, I'll do that again. Like the question is, like, do people who use Python as a primary language are looked down upon, from people who are using C++ or Java in like coding interviews or internship interviews?
Yeah, so you're just asking, are they looked down upon? Is that what you're asking? Are?
Oh, yep, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I just didn't catch the actual question
Yeah.
part of that sentence. That's okay. I wouldn't say so. I mean, I think really it depends what you can do with those languages, right? I mean, like if I'm an expert in Python and then some guy is like a beginner in C++, I probably have more of an advantage than he does, right? And it also is like, it doesn't mean you can't learn those languages. Like I think a lot of people have a misconception that the languages are so crazy important. I personally don't think they are. I mean, I think you can learn any programming language if you're a good programmer fairly quickly. Are you going to be an expert at it? No, but within a few months, you're probably going to know what most other developers that use that language know. So I think it's more about what can you do with that language? What can you demonstrate? And how do you think? Do you think like a programmer? Would you make a good fit on the team? That's a lot more important. And I can say for a fact in all my interviews, I'll give you an example at my Shopify interview, which is one of the larger tech companies in Canada. They didn't even really ask me what programming languages I knew. They didn't even really care. They were like, yeah, you know Python? We don't use Python at all here. Really, we only use like Ruby on Rails and all that stuff. But that doesn't matter. You know, show us what you know in terms of software design. And I designed a little program for them and they were like, yeah, you're hired. And they sent me a job offer, right? So I would just really focus more on the skills and the way that you think and the way you solve problems rather than what languages you know. I mean, the language is really just a tool, right? That's the way I think of it. Anyone can learn to use a tool, but can you learn how to think critically? Can you learn problem solving? That's a skill that's much more looked for. And I think that's the reason they have coding interviews, right? If they just cared what language you knew, they'd just ask you and give you a little quiz on that language. But no, they give you some general problem and you have to solve that using whatever tool it is that you want to use. So I don't think they're looked down upon. Maybe they are. I mean, I have no idea. It depends where you apply. You know, if you're at a company that only does C++, yeah, maybe C++ is going to be better and people look down on you for knowing Python. But at the same time, if you can solve that crazy algorithm question with Python, there's no reason you wouldn't be able to do that in C++, right? So.
Yeah, right. Like we should, yeah, you're right. So yeah, we have another interesting question like from the stream. The question is that is there any merit in using Python/PiGame for game development rather than mainstream game engines like Unity slash Unreal?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, the reason I use PiGame, if that's directed that, because they probably know I use PiGame, is just because it's really fast and easy, and it's cool for me to just make like little games with it. Like nothing I ever make with PiGame, I plan on actually releasing or making some proper game. And I honestly couldn't name you anything that's made in PiGame that's like a commercial game that would sell for any money. So I think if you want to do a real game, something that is actually going to be used or something that you actually want to have some kind of decent performance from, then use a proper game engine. You know, use Pandas 3D. That's a new one that's kind of out right now. It's tough to use, but it is a cool module. Use Unity. Use whatever other ones they were mentioning there. PiGame is good for me for making little simulations, making little 2D games and teaching programming and just making fun stuff. Like, that's why I use PiGame, not because I plan on actually releasing anything. And I think we can say it's probably a lot easier to make a little 2D game in Python than it is to make a full 3D modeled game in Unity or something like that. So yeah.
Yeah. Like for learning also it's great. Like, yeah.
Exactly.
So, yep. So the next question we have from Jatin. He asks, hey Tim, you have built a solid personal brand as a developer. What advice would you give to somebody thinking to build one too?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad that that person noticed as well, because a lot of people just think that it is just, a straight tutorial channel. That's all I do. But this is really a full-time business, right? This generates, a substantial amount of income. It's something I've been working on for a long time, and it is a proper business, right? I have to do accounting. I have to handle all that kind of stuff. I'm, filing taxes, all of that. But building a personal brand, I think is important. I mean, not everyone can do it. Not everyone wants to do it. But if you are looking to do it, all I can say is, consistency is key in whatever you decide to do. It doesn't matter if you have 10 followers, 1,000 followers, 100,000 followers. You can't let yourself be discouraged by how many people are looking at your stuff. You have to kind of set a goal for yourself and work towards that goal, regardless of what the feedback of other people is. Of course, it's important to, listen to your fans or listen to people that are commenting on your videos. But at the same time, the internet is a place where it's a very vocal minority of angry people, right? And I know personally, like when you get started on the internet and you get started doing like something like that, it's really easy to get discouraged by those few people that comment like, oh, you're crap, or why are you doing that? Or, oh, that's so cringy, whatever it is they're going to put there. But the reality is, they're on their phone commenting that on a video that you actually are spending time to make because you're trying to grow something and you're trying to do something more. So I don't know, just keep going, be consistent. But at the same time, be, kind of careful of the ways that you spend your time and what you're doing. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of waste your time and get discouraged easily in building a personal brand. If you think that you're going to, start a YouTube channel and in a month, you're going to all of a sudden be the next big YouTuber. Unfortunately, that's wrong, right? It took me almost a year and a half to get my channel to a point where I was even able to generate any income, right? It's something that I did just because I thought it was going to look good on my resume, which it does. And it was something I enjoyed doing. It was something that I liked. So that kept me going and allowed me to stay consistent. But if you're just doing it to make money, or if you're just doing it because, someone else told you to do it, you don't truly enjoy what you're doing, then it's going to be hard to stay consistent. So that's kind of just some random general advice for that.
Okay. Yeah, hey Tim, I have a quick question for you. I'm a full stack developer and I wanted to start ML and AI. The thing is, like, I don't want to go into research, research point of view. I just want to build application that I can use with my web applications, so like mobile applications, and show them like what it can do. So what do you prefer, like how we can go with it? Like, should I learn PyTorch, TensorFlow, and what are the things that I should learn as a developer point of view?
As a developer point of view, what should you learn? So this is like getting started with machine learning and AI. That's the question.
Yeah, we're getting started
okay.
as a developer point of view. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's many different routes you can go down, right? I think the first thing to understand is the different areas in machine learning and in artificial intelligence. Like, a lot of people like to kind of just throw that term out, AI, ML, and, nothing wrong with doing that. But the reality is there is so many different fields within that field that depending on what you want to do, my answer is going to be completely different. So I usually recommend learning the fundamental core machine learning algorithms before kind of going anywhere else. These just show you, first of all, the power of basic mathematics, which is really important in machine learning and AI. And what you're going to realize the further you get kind of down that hole is that all of this isn't just some like magical black box, right? It's not just some module that does something. It really is just very advanced math that is able to come up with these predictions and do these magic things like recommend videos to you on YouTube, right? And I find it's very valuable to understand, at least on a surface level, how that math works, even if it's from some very basic algorithms, because it gives you an appreciation for what's actually happening. So to give you more of a kind of a concrete thing here, I would recommend learn like support vector machines, linear regression, k-nearest neighbors, the very basic fundamental algorithms that if you have like a grade 9 level math, you'll be able to understand. And then from there, build some basic things with that. See how you can analyze data, look about in terms of how you clean data, how you get it pre-processed, how you get it ready to go. Because what you're going to realize very quickly is that machine learning is a lot more about what data you have and how you present that data to a model than it is about actually just creating these super complicated models on your own. So once you've done that, again, now I have no idea what direction to tell you to go into, because I don't know if you want to do reinforcement learning. I don't know if you want to do neural networks, if you want to do image recognition. There's so many different paths that I think you need to do some research and look at all of these different areas and figure out what you want to go down. But if, as a general rule of thumb, say you want to do something like neural networks, which is kind of what a lot of people like to jump into because it's really cool and interesting, then learning a module like TensorFlow or PITorch, and Keras, which is kind of like on top of TensorFlow, is going to be your next step. And fortunately, on TensorFlow website and on PiTorch, they have all kinds of in-depth tutorials that can build you full things already, right? But my whole point with this is that if you want to actually be able to build something on your own, you kind of have to have some understanding of how these actually work on a lower level, because it's very extremely complicated, and very small things can tweak your results a ton, especially if you don't understand what they're doing. So I don't know, that's kind of my general answer. Start very basic, learn these core algorithms, make some things that might not be the most exciting, but that will actually teach you how this works. Learn about data pre-processing. Make sure you're a strong programmer before you do this. Do some research, figure out what area you want to go down, and then start looking at specific kind of methods and, I don't know, algorithms and things in that space.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Like, I got to what you're saying. I got the general idea. But a quick one more question. What do you think? What do you prefer, PyTorch versus TensorFlow for a developer?
Yeah, so this is like, kind of the Google versus Facebook argument. I don't know, to be honest with you. I've used TensorFlow a ton. I've also used PyTorch a little bit. I'm a fan of PITorch from the little bit that I've used it. TensorFlow seems to be more widely used. It seems like a lot more people have tutorials on it. There's resources around it. I think it's been around longer. I could be incorrect with that. But learn either of them. I mean, again, these are just tools, right? These are tools to help you make some kind of model. In theory, you could use both of them at the same time if you really wanted to, right? For different tasks. So I can't really give you a concrete answer like, or learn TensorFlow, learn PITorch. It depends what you're doing. And what company you're going to work for, what you want to do with that skill. I think TensorFlow maybe is a little bit easier to get started with. But PITorch, I don't know. Again, really, right? It doesn't matter. I don't think you're going to regret learning either of them. I don't think it will make a big difference in your journey learning machine learning and AI.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Tim,
No problem.
one more question. See, if I am building a backend application, okay, and I'm going for an interview, and another applicant is also have like a backend developer. Okay, that only difference with our application is like I have a production grade application. Okay, I have microservices and everything, but the key features are same in both the application. So how can I demonstrate the interviewer that my application is like much more complicated and it is like production grade application, because like what this is like the features and how they are working, and that exactly is the same in both the applications.
Sure. So this is hard, right? Because the reality is, like, as an interviewer, people just don't really care, right? Like, it gets to a point where your project only means so much, and if they do the same thing, someone's not going to dig into your GitHub code and start looking at it, right? So it is really hard to do that. You need to kind of make something that stands out, right? You can make a full production app, but to me, right, like, what I would prefer to see if you had that on a resume is like, this app has been used by 500 people. I had, 7,000 posts. This, like, do something around the impact that your app has had because of the fact that it is actually like a full production application. I don't think on a resume it's going to be very easy, especially in those 2 to 3 lines you have to describe the project, if you even have that, to be able to illustrate how complicated it actually is. And sometimes you can even get caught if you're trying to be a little bit too cocky in explaining kind of what this actually does. So I think you have the project on there. Maybe when you get to the interview, if you make it to that point, is your chance to really explain how complicated that is, right? To say, hey, I really wanted to make this as a production application. These are the steps I took. This is kind of the process I went down. This is what I learned. And you can kind of tell your story about how you created that app and what's involved in all of that. But on a resume, I think it's pretty difficult to say, you could label it like production ready, but what are you going to say that's going to differentiate it from that other guy's app, right? Maybe rather than focusing on what it does, focus on how it actually works on an infrastructure level. You could say like, well, I have, a micro web service that's attached to an API, and then we have, this machine learning model that runs that, whatever, right? You can do something like that. But that's a hard question to answer, because again, I don't know what the application is. I don't know what you've done. It's hard to show that off. And that's why I usually don't even recommend people to make super crazy production level projects for their resume, because unless you can actually demonstrate what it is, it's kind of a waste of your time when you could just create, kind of a dummy version. And the reality is your interviewer isn't going to go look into that GitHub repository. And so long as what you're saying makes some kind of sense related to the project, they're probably not going to bother even validating that. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And personally, I don't work on any production scale applications for my resume. I would only ever do that if I'm getting paid to do that, or if it's something I really wanted to work on, because of that exact reason, that I find it's just diminishing returns, because it's really hard to explain to someone in, 2 or 3 sentences or in a minute or two how complicated this thing is that you actually worked on.
Hey Tim, Ishan Sharma here. Now we're talking about machine learning. One question that I had is that there are some programs that are like called as AutoML, and they are used by big corporations like Google uses it, Salesforce use it. So one question that I had is that could that lead to the end of data scientists, and they wouldn't require data scientists to actually build those models for them? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know, like, I don't keep up with the space enough to know all of the super new things that are coming out and kind of the direction it's going in. But from what I've heard, yeah, we're getting to the point where we're building ML that can build ML, right? And I don't think that's ever really going to eliminate the data scientist or eliminate the humans that are working with that machine, at least not in the next probably 5 to 10 years. But I think that definitely is something to think about. And I think if you're someone who is a data scientist, I would consider at least having some other things kind of in your back pocket that you could move to in case, like something like, oh, I am a good programmer. I'm not just a data scientist. I actually can write code, right? Because a lot of data scientists really are just, the kind of tutorial coders. They'll just go and look up the syntax they need, and that's all. They don't actually really understand a lot of the stuff that they're writing. They're just good at math and statistics and analyzing graphs and information. So I don't know. It's a tough question. The auto ML stuff is interesting. I think we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens and how heavily we rely on that. I can't imagine that in the next 5 or 10 years that's going to replace this field. If anything, I think there might be a surge in kind of machine learning engineers and people building these models to make better auto ML. But after that, who knows what's going to happen? I've no idea.
All right, bro. Yeah, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Coming back, Tim, there's a really good question from Jatin Rao in the stream. So the question goes, what do you think about the perfectionism syndrome? As a developer, I find myself not publishing that article or that video due to that. How do you cope up with that, and your advice?
Sure. So I think perfectionist not okay. Let's try to understand where this person is coming from. If they're talking about like YouTube videos or code or whatever it may be, I'll just kind of give you a personal example from my YouTube channel and how I've kind of dealt with that. Because I am someone who does like things to be perfect. I want things to get better every time. But I think it's more about getting better than it is about being perfect. You can't really ever define anything as perfect. I think, a perfectionist, the definition really, right? You never think anything's perfect or you want it to be perfect. So for me, it's about growing and getting better rather than setting a super high standard at the beginning and not being able to reach that. I think like what I've done on my YouTube channel personally is every single video I aim to be a little bit better than the last one. I don't aim to be perfect in this video. It's okay if I make a few mistakes, but I want to do better than what I did the last time. And I think that's a really healthy way to not only get better and perfect what you're doing, but to also still be able to kind of publish content or get things out there, because you're not focused super in the short term. You're focused on developing in the long term and getting better as you go. And I mean, you can look at my YouTube channel, watch a video from 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months ago, and now, and you'll see the production quality differences. You'll see the different ways that I articulate things. This microphone, I just got this a few months ago, right? Because I wanted to slowly start perfecting the videos and get better. So I think trying to aim more on focusing on improving and getting better and learning rather than perfecting the one thing you're working on right now would be my advice for that. At the same time, there's a time and the place for perfection depending on what you're doing. But if it comes to online content, you're talking about YouTube videos, stuff like that, the king is really just content and just content as much as you can. And I would rather have 10 okay videos than have one perfect video, because the chance of that one perfect video gets viewed a ton of times versus those 10 videos potentially all getting viewed a bunch of times. It's kind of like a cost benefit analysis, if you want to put it that way. So that's my advice for that.
So the idea is to keep going and not thinking too much about like going to the ultimate, like perfect. Okay. So,
yeah. I mean, I would say, sorry, just to add on to that, I would say, you can think about the quality of what you're doing, and I would always reflect on what you've done and say, how could I improve? How could I get better? But I don't think that kind of, I don't like dwelling on it in the current is the best solution. I think, say you make that video, you can perfect it a little bit, but maybe say, okay, you know what, this is what I've learned from this video. This is the mistakes I've made. This is what I didn't like. In the next video, I'm going to try to fix that. And then moving slowly rather than just, one day in the next, you go from not perfect to perfect, right? I don't think that's reasonable. And I think that's just going to lead to you being dissatisfied with a lot of the stuff that you make. So that's kind of my idea around that.
Correct. So we have this next question from Manhal. So the question is like for non-computer science students in university aspiring to be a software developer, which of the which of the following carries the most weightage on the resume? And he has asked weighing between amazing past projects versus problem solving. So
yeah, so that's a tough one, right? If you don't have a computer science degree, you immediately have to prove yourself, right? You got to prove yourself on that front page of the resume that you don't need the computer science degree, right? You almost have to kind of subsidize it with something else. So I think that both are going to be important. I think that the first step is to get to the interview, right? I mean, if you want to think sequentially, you got to get there. So if you want to get there, you're going to have to demonstrate through text on your resume or through images or whatever it may be that you know what you're talking about. Now, you can do that in a variety of different ways. You can do courses on Udemy and stuff like that and list those. I don't think that's super super valuable. Like if I saw someone with a bunch of Udemy certificates, that probably wouldn't be, super impressive to me and stand out. But I would focus a lot on the projects you've made, what you've done in those projects, and the impact that some of those projects have had. I think that some people forget that what these large tech companies, they're not paying you by hour, and they're not paying you based on how much code you write. They're paying you based on how much impact you have in the company. And I can say firsthand that the way Microsoft does performance, right, is based on impact. And that's not a secret. That's most other companies as well. So if you can focus on the impact some of the things you've done have had, you're immediately going to stand out. You could say, hey, I made this project here. Maybe I made it for a small business. I made it for my mom or dad, whatever. I made it for myself, and it saved me 3 hours a day in administrative tasks, whatever. Or I made this stock trader, saved me, 4 hours a day in automatically trading stocks, right? Stuff like that, I think will stand out. But yeah, I think both are going to be important. And problem solving, of course, when you get to the interview is going to be as important for you as it is for me, if for anyone else. I mean, when you get to the interview and you have to do technical programming problems, problem solving is what shines. You need to have that skill. So I think really that's no different than it would be for any other candidate. But in terms of what you need to demonstrate, yeah, I think more projects, I think showing your skills in other ways, listing your skills and actually demonstrating how you've used them will be important to get to the interview. But I'm not in that situation, so it's hard for me to speak directly to how you would do that.
Yes, I think this answer also, clears up the confusion among developers, like deciding between more courses or more projects like to work on. So that's nice. Coming to the next question, we have the next question is from Rishabh. He's asking, like, how would you recommend someone, like, as we're talking about problem solving right now, how would you recommend someone to get started with data structures and master that, like, in the path?
Yeah. So how do you get started with data structures and master them? The reality is data structures are not, a lot of people think of them as this huge, like, intimidating thing. In my opinion, they're not that difficult. They really are just, something that you kind of look at and kind of have to memorize in terms of the time complexity and what the structure actually is. I can't really give you any concrete resources, but what I can say is that, look at what the core data structures are. You should be able to find that, right? Like stacks, queues, heaps, whatever. And then those common algorithms like breadth first search, depth first search, whatever, all of those. First of all, find all of those, and then make yourself a curriculum around what you want to learn based on them. Like you want to learn stacks and queues. All right, spend a day learning about queues. Go on Wikipedia, read the entire thing about queues, and then go and look at something on, working on queues. The way that you can teach yourself something is by building yourself a curriculum. So if you want to get started with that, first of all, figure out what it is that you want to learn, and then build yourself something around that. Say, okay, today I'm going to learn this. I'm going to, read this article, and then I'm going to try to make my own queue in Python or whatever it may be. It's just really hard to give concrete examples and ideas on how to do these kind of things because it differs for everyone, right? And personally, I learned data structures and algorithms in class in my university. And that kind of gave me that curriculum, right? But even that wasn't enough for me. There was times where I had to go and look up, a tutorial on YouTube on this specific data structure, right? And using them is going to be the way that you really fundamentally understand them. So, go on LeetCode after you learn about a heap or a priority queue, and then implement that and use that on LeetCode, right? Just actually understanding how they work and using them in your code will probably be the best way to really grasp them. But the concept itself isn't that difficult. I mean, you just have to learn a little bit about time complexity and space complexity, which the concept itself is pretty simple. It's not too crazy, especially if you know grade 12 math, and then just start using some of those in different projects. And you're also going to realize that, like, you don't practically in the real world, there's a lot of these data structures you don't use very often. When you're actually writing software, it is a very theoretical thing. So
yes. Similar to this question, on similar lines, we have a question regarding what should a college student or developer weigh more, like between competitive coding versus development, like doing more projects and in the development. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so competitive coding versus development. I'm not a competitive coder. I get the impression that in India, I believe it's probably a bigger deal than it is kind of here in North America and in the in Canada. But So I don't really know that much about competitive programming, and personally, I don't know many people that are competitive programmers. I would go based off intuition by saying that if you're a good competitive programmer, I'd probably focus on that because you probably have actual statistics that you can show, like, hey, I was like, the top elite code guy this week, or I won this right? Stuff that is actually meaningful that you can put on your resume. But if you're just like an okay competitive programmer, I wouldn't rely on that as your like primary thing. I think there's a healthy balance between both, right? I think if you have a project or two and you can demonstrate, hey, I can make this, but also you're really good at competitive programming, that's probably going to be great. So long as it's not just super narrow in one direction, I think you'll be fine. And I think a balance and being well-rounded is personally what I would look for in a candidate, and what I would encourage people to do. Have, a few projects and then be like, but competitive coding is kind of my thing. I like doing that. So I spend most of my time here and, I'm ranked whatever on this website or whatever it may be. So that would kind of be my advice. But again, I don't know competitive programming that much, so take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it might be in India, it's a bit like more bigger of a deal. So yeah, coming to next question, Yash Jain here asks, I am inclined towards embedded software, but that's not something that is taught in my bachelor's degree. Any advice you might have for me? What field should I try to explore, or something I should learn? If you have anything on that.
Yeah, nothing specific, but here's the thing, right? If it's not something taught in your bachelor degree, like why does that matter, right? Just go learn it. I mean, if you want to learn about embedded software, go learn about embedded software. There's, no barrier to entry to learn anything nowadays. Can someone name something that you can't learn online? I think that's pretty difficult unless it's a very like hands-on skill that you would actually have to master by practicing with your body. But that's my thing. When I was in elementary school, high school, I didn't not learn coding because it wasn't taught in school. I learned it because I liked doing it and because the internet existed. So I would just encourage you, take some of that time where maybe you're spending video games or watching Netflix or whatever it may be that you're doing that might be wasting your time, and then learn embedded systems or learn embedded programming or whatever it is that you said. Just you can do that on your own time. And if you want to find a curriculum around that, go look up, Harvard embedded systems, or go look up some school that has that. Look at what they have for the headings of their lessons, and then Google those and learn those, right? That's what I do personally. If I want to learn some advanced topic, I'll go look at Harvard, I'll look at MIT, I'll see what they've taught in that area. And then maybe I'll even watch some of their free videos that they have online because it is one of the top schools. Or I'll just take those headings, Google them, and learn based on the curriculum that they've already defined. So that's all I can really give you for that.
Yeah, that this, I think this can be applied in as you said, in any learning curriculum. You can try looking at curriculums from Harvard and like MIT, and you can start off. So that's nice. Next question we have from Arpit. He asks, what are your plans ahead? Are you thinking of going as a full-time YouTuber, or would you like to work in the tech industry also?
That's a really good question, and I wish I had a great answer for that. The reason I'm doing this internship right now is really for me to just kind of test out the waters and see what it's like to work in the software industry, right? Personally, I'm so young, I'm about to turn 20 years old. I've got a lot of time ahead of me, and I'd rather take some time kind of in my childhood or, when I'm developing, to try out some different areas and taste different things so that I know what I actually like doing and what I want to do. I could see myself doing both. I could see myself being a full-time YouTuber. I could see myself working in the software industry. I could see myself doing it at the same time like I'm doing right now. And I think it's going to depend what opportunities open up and where this channel goes. I mean, there's a very real possibility that this channel could move to a point where it makes no sense for me to go work in the software industry because it's going to be generating much more money that I could make there. And it's just going to be something that's a huge business opportunity that I can't really pass up, right? But then there also could be the possibility where I get tired of doing this. Maybe I don't want to do it anymore. Maybe I don't want to film videos, and I'd rather take a year or two and work in the software industry and then maybe reevaluate and go back. So right now it's looking like I'm going to be continuing to do both, at least until I graduate university. But once I graduate, I'm going to be a lot more free to kind of move wherever I want to, do whatever I want. I'm not going to be tied down by a school semester and schedule. And that's when I'll make more of a serious decision about it. But I'm probably going to be wavering between the two. And I don't anticipate, ending this YouTube channel at any point in the near time future, if that is what they might be leading to. So, yeah.
Yep. So, yeah, we'll wrap up in some time. We have last few questions, one or two. So, yeah, here Nihar asks, sometimes when I'm working on a personal side project, I have many features in mind when I'm starting off. While building it, I couldn't get all of them in my application, and I struggle through this a lot. How do you manage to get out of such cases?
Yeah, so that's commonly known as feature creep. I mean, as soon as you start making any kind of application, immediately you can dream up, the million things you wanted to do, and you all of a sudden now you have this new idea that's literally like the next Facebook of the world, right? This just comes down to even like a very basic business principle, which is an MVP, right? Minimum viable product. You want to start by building something that's foundational that can be added to. You want to work on a really solid initial design, something that solves the core problem that you're trying to solve. You don't need to add all these other fancy things that enhance it or make it better. You want to make something that just on its core level is like the frame of a car, right? If you want to think of it like that, make something that drives, not something that is like, the next Ferrari, if you want to put it that way. So what I usually do is I'll list out all those features that, I might potentially want. Maybe I'll come up with all these ideas, start brainstorming, and then I'll look at all these features and I say, is this fundamental to the functionality of what I'm trying to build? Do I absolutely need this feature? And if the answer to that is no, or I don't know, I just cross it out, because you only want to start building with something that is completely fundamental to what you actually want to achieve. So if you have an app that's, like scheduling babysitters for people or something like that, then you probably don't need a ton of other like random features on that. You probably just need the features that are related to actually scheduling that. And then once you build those and the core app itself works really well, you can start slowly adding in features as you go. And look at any, really popular website, any really popular product that is tech product. Most of them started as a very fundamental, like rudimentary thing where it just solved one problem. Then over time, they slowly add all of those features. And there's a lot of really great examples of that. So that would be my advice on that.
Yes, that makes sense. Yep. So yeah, like there's Shubham here asking this. I have heard people say that they're working on an ML project, like machine learning project. I've taken up a lot of online courses and participated in data science competitions on sites like Kaggle, but I haven't been able to figure out what exactly a project is. Any guidance for him?
What exactly a project is? It's a good question. Usually what I like to do with that is try to find some kind of app I can make that doesn't really completely revolve around machine learning, and then integrate machine learning into that. Like, for example, say you're into data science, you've done that. Like, why don't you make like a little blog website or something? It can be super simple where people can just leave comments or something, and then use an ML model to like sort them based on what do you think the most popular is going to be, right? Like something as simple as that. Like I'll just take applications like, say you're doing this is an example of something I tried to do in a hackathon. I tried to make this music player. So essentially there was this company there and they're like, yeah, use our music API and let people like make music. So essentially we tried to clone like kind of a Spotify, like you could search for songs, you could make playlists, all of that was working. And then our spin on that used machine learning was, okay, we're going to take a photo of your face when you sign into the app. We're going to detect your mood based on that. And then we're going to serve you a playlist that fits that mood, right? So those are kind of what I think the best machine learning projects are. Building a project that's not at its core a machine learning project and integrating machine learning and AI into it, right? Like think of YouTube, for example. Ton of ML and AI goes into that. Even if you think about like watching the videos, looking for inappropriate things or looking for swear words in terms of like speech detection, all of that. But the product itself at a core is just serving videos to people, right? So if you can find some kind of thing that you can make that's interesting that you could integrate ML into, I think that would be a great idea. And, you can go really basic. I've seen people do like a sign language detector, for example. That's really cool. And that's image recognition, shows you the sign. So I don't know, that's my idea with that. And I think those will give you the best projects if you integrate ML into something that doesn't need ML, but could use it, right? It would enhance it.
Yeah, Tim, we have one more question, the last one. Soumya asked that I just feel like learning various stuff, but I never come up with implementing anything because it takes a lot of time for implementation and I just switch to learning other concepts. So could you advise him something like with which he can make things streamlined for him?
Sure. So that's obviously, and I totally feel that. I think everyone feels that in some capacity, right? You're like, oh, I could, go ahead and implement this, but I kind of already know it. I'd rather just learn something else. And, maybe that's a good thing because you want to keep learning and that's awesome. I would encourage you to do that. But what I would also say is that you can learn a lot by working on projects and actually implementing things. And in fact, where I've learned the most is actually by making things that I don't already know how to make, right? What I'll do is I'll pick some project that I have somewhat of an idea of how I would tackle. but I don't know all the ins and outs. And then I start building that, because what will happen is it will be kind of a blended learning thing where what I'm doing is half learning what I need to do, half implementing that. When I learn something, I implement that immediately, right? And learning could be as easy as me reading a Stack Overflow article and going, oh, that's how that works. Oh, that's how the asynchronous stuff communicates, whatever it may be, right? So I would encourage you to pick something that challenges you, that's kind of a project or something you might want to work on, and then try to implement it. And you'll already have some of the knowledge, you'll know how to do some of it. So you can apply some of what you already know, but you'll learn a ton along the way. And even think of, like, say you don't know how to do web development at all. Maybe be like, hey, you know, the next few days, what I want to do is I want to make a really mini website that is like a to-do list tracker or something like that. Just set some goal for yourself. It could be something small, but you don't already know how to do, and then work towards that by learning, you know, going through tutorials, then applying, and then learning and applying. And that's how I really got good at programming when I was young. I picked things that I wanted to make that I didn't already know how to do, and I just looked up how to do them as I went. A prime example of this is I wanted to make an iOS app. I never sat through a full iOS tutorial. What I did was I set up like my iOS environment, and every time I watched something, I immediately took what from that and I applied it into the app that I was making. And this was when I was like 13 or 14. I was able to make a full iOS app. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, sounds great. So thank you so much, Jim, for taking out your time and helping all our developers. They had a lot of queries. We have taken up almost all of them. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. All right, is that the end of the call? We good?
Yeah, we don't have any more.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Awesome. All right, well, guys, have a good time with the rest of the event. Hope it goes well, and hopefully I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, Tim. Bye-bye.
Yep.
No problem. See you guys.
Having a talk by Karya tomorrow. The topic will be workshop on strategies and process for building an idea to a product. It will be streamed on 6 p.m. tomorrow. You'll be getting your reminders again for the same. Thank you so much for joining in.